This is the Physical Activity Researcher Podcast, a podcast for researchers of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sports. Join for a relaxed dialogue about research design, practicalities, and, well, anything related to research. Learn from your fellow researchers useful and relevant information that does not fit into formal content and limited space of scientific publications. And here is your host, researcher and entrepreneur, Olli Tikkanen.
Welcome everyone. We have a different kind of episode today, as we will be switching roles and I will be as a guest, while Biomechanics of Our Minds podcasts Melissa Boswell and Hannah O'Day will be hosting the show. We are going to be talking about how Physical Activity Researcher podcast got started, what funny things have happened along the way, and how great and nice people researchers are. And here are the hosts, Melissa and Hannah.
So thanks for being with us, Olli.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, would you mind just giving a brief background of who you are and your podcast?
Yeah, so I'm Olli. I'm from Finland. I'm almost from the Arctic Circle. I'm from a place called Kajaani. It's 2 hours south from Arctic Circle, and it might sound interesting, but it's pretty dark in the winter. So I think that's probably have affected my mind quite a bit, but I have survived the darkness and been able to start doing a podcast. And I've been studying in a place called Jyväskylä. I've been studying biomechanics, exercise physiology, and my major was sport coaching and fitness testing. And I did my PhD about daily muscle activity. And during the end of my PhD, I started a startup company called Fibion with 2 of my university colleagues. And I think that's my story this far.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Do you have any? I think those 2 things that you said, that there's a lot of darkness, and you study physical inactivity, and so I was wondering if you have some tips for how you stay active with the increasing darkness, and it sounds like it's probably also very cold by you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm best person to give advices, but yeah, you have inside places, although now most of them are closed, but in normal times you can do your activity inside, and I like to go away during the darkest months. So usually I just leave the darkness and go Thailand or somewhere else, which is usually my tactic to do it, but I don't have any super good tips for you, unfortunately.
That's right. I was just curious kind of what you do for that. But yeah, that's good to know. Thanks.
Getting out of the darkness sounds like a good strategy to deal with the darkness. So Olli, thanks for sharing your background with us. We're wondering, you've started this startup and company, and you also have this awesome podcast going. What made you start the podcast? Why did you start the podcast?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always liked the science. I've always liked the discussion, the debating, kind of synthesis of the information. I'm not maybe the biggest fan of peer review process or analysis or spending all your time with the Excel spreadsheet. So I think for me, the science and the discussion part is the best part, and it's usually missing from many of the researchers' work. So I think it's a really nice way of doing science without doing the actual research work that much.
Yeah, that's such a good point and a good way to think about it. It doesn't really feel like work that much when you're podcasting, despite the time it may take. It just doesn't have that sort of additional, like you have to do it or something like that. It's more fun. Maybe we could even think about that and how we can bring that into a normal work setting. But yeah, so maybe you can talk a little bit about how long you have been podcasting and some of your biggest learnings from doing that.
Yeah, I think I started 1.5 years ago, and I think it's quite amazing. Like, you just order a microphone and it gets to your home in few days. You plug it in and you make few clicks. You can record audio and then you can publish and get it out. And I think that was amazing. The first episode, I just called to my friend that come for a coffee, and I put the microphone on and we recorded the first episode. And I recorded few episodes with my friends, and then I was like, all right, I will just try and send emails to well-known researchers around the world. And I was really surprised when they actually said yes. And I was like, oh, I need to learn to do this actually. And I don't know if I have learned it, but it has gone all right. And I was really surprised how well people said yes and give their time and give their support for the podcast. So that's been really nice aspect.
Yeah, that is really nice. I'm curious. I think we've had the same experience where we've been very surprised at how quickly and how people are so willing to be on the podcast and say yes. And I'm curious if there's anything you think you did when reaching out to people that made them more likely to say yes, that maybe other people could gain some advice from when sort of blindly reaching out to people.
Yeah, I'm not sure how did I do. I should check back my emails, but I think I just tried to explain that it doesn't take much of their time. So basically, and that they are the experts, so they don't really need to prepare. They know already the substance, that it's just kind of informal chat that we record. They don't need to prepare anything. It's easy for them. So it's easier for them time-wise, and then just kind of asking for a favor if they could be part. So I think it's just that, and I try to keep the email short. I know people don't have too much time, so I just try to go to the point, and then if people said yes, then being flexible, arranging the time, and just giving them good information how to do it, how to avoid the technical glitches and so on.
For most sedentary behavior and physical activity researchers, collecting the research data is one of the most frustrating steps of a project. This is why we devised a revolutionary new way to collect data. Fibion Sense Motion is a cutting-edge, next-generation system that allows you to easily and remotely collect, store, and manage data. Our solution features a tiny, waterproof device that captures the sedentary behavior and physical activity data, a mobile app for automatic uploading of the data from the device, and a cloud service for managing the data. Even better, all collected data is GDPR compliant, and you have access to automatically analyzed variables of activity types and raw 3-axis accelerometer data. Discover the convenience and power behind our solution at sense.fibion.com. That is SENS.Fibion.com. Fibion, created by researchers for researchers.
Those are all super, super great points. I think telling people that it's not going to be a huge time sink for them, and that they're just going to get to share something they're passionate about. Those are great tips for what to highlight in your emails, where you're asking people to give some of their precious time to this. And I'm curious, it's often true that the interviewee doesn't have to prepare too much, because as you noted, they're the expert. But you as the interviewer must have to do a lot of background work. I know Melissa and I are often, we share a Google Doc and are doing some research and coming up with questions together. And it's really nice to have the shared responsibility of coming up with questions from different perspectives and things like that. I'm curious how you find that process. How do you come up with the questions for your interviews, and what kind of research does that involve?
That's a great question, and I think it has varied a lot. And when it's a subject that I know something, at least it's close to my field of study, I try to make questions. I try to think like kind of new questions that haven't been asked and so on. But if it's something I don't know much, for example, autism, and if I start to kind of studying autism and try to make good questions, I probably still don't know enough to ask good questions. So then I don't actually prepare too much, but I just try to kind of ask the stupid questions, because probably listeners don't know too much about autism either. So I'm just kind of trying to ask the questions that probably the listeners would be asking, kind of, how do you define autism? What kind of different ones you have, and so on. So I think it depends a lot. And sometimes I have prepared well and it has gone bad. And sometimes I haven't prepared well and it has gone good. So I'm not sure how to do it. Sometimes it's just nice to go with the flow and you just listen what the person says and you ask like in a coffee table discussion. So I'm not sure how you should actually do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love this idea of going with the flow and also asking what you called the dumb questions, because I remember one time someone asked Hannah and I, like, what kind of level do you podcast at? Is it very technical? And we're like, well, a lot of times we don't understand the details of the research from the people that we're interviewing. So from that perspective, we can't have it even be very technical because we're just trying to understand it as the listeners are understanding it, which sounds like something you do sometimes as well. And you mentioned that, sometimes it has gone bad. And I'm curious if you have any examples of when that might have happened. So Hannah and I, this kind of relates to how we love talking about failure. So maybe a time that you feel like it went bad, but what you've learned from that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's many examples when it hasn't gone too well. I think one was that when the pandemic started, we were supposed actually to go for a month to UK. So we had rented out our apartment and then we couldn't go to UK. So we ended up to a summer cottage, and unfortunately internet didn't work probably very, very well inside the cottage. So I ended up driving my camper van in the yard of the neighbors. And then I think my recording was early in the morning because my guests were from Australia. And I didn't have any heating in the camper van. So it was really cold morning. It was, I think, probably March in Finland. And I had all my winter clothes on. I was inside the sleeping bag. And then we had some delay. And I had first time like 2 guests at the same time. So it was quite interesting. I was kind of taking my hands out from the sleeping bag, putting the microphone on, and then trying to manage the discussion, and the delay was making it difficult. So I think it's a funny story now. It wasn't that funny when I was doing it.
Yeah, I could see how this would definitely be one of those times where looking back on it is a lot funnier than in the moment. And yeah, I can't imagine, because I think already just having a delay is challenging, but also being so cold and actually doing the podcast from your sleeping bag. I'm just very impressed that you were able to even carry out that episode. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't think Melissa and I have had conditions like that ever. Oh, wait, there was one time where there was like traffic I was like at a Starbucks trying to record outside, and there was like a crazy person talking on the phone, like nearby. Like, just I should say they were angry on the phone, and so that was going on. And
Yeah, and I remember an ambulance went by. You could just it felt like we were in a Starbucks at times.
yeah.
Something else I wanted to ask about, Ollie. So on our podcast, or through our podcast, I guess we have different types of episodes. So we have the main episode, we have bonus episodes, and then we have what we're doing with Student Voices, where we have other students come on and host an episode. And I think that you've had kind of a new podcast emerge. I don't know if you would call it like a series of the physical activity researcher, or just a new podcast that has come from it about meaningful sport. And I was wondering if you could just touch on what that podcast is and how it came about.
Yeah. So that's I'm not doing the meaningful sports series. Nora Ronkainen is doing that, and she's doing kind of research related to that, and she wanted to start podcasting, and we just thought that it would fit well within the physical activity researcher podcast. There would be synergies for this, so that's kind of a short story how it started.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I loved that you just used the word synergies, and how that is such a biomechanics term, but also such a perfect term for, your energy flowing with another person, or just kind of the initiatives working and paralleling together.
And it's actually really nice with the podcast that there's no rules. In a way, you can do whatever you want with your podcast. With for example, when you're doing scientific publications, there's a really strict rules how you can do, and with podcasting we can both publish this episode. For example, you can have different series, you can try different things, you can go live. So I think the freedom is really nice part, and being creative.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Just having that freedom to move in the direction that you want to move. And I've enjoyed listening to the Physical Activity Researcher podcast, and I totally agree that the Meaningful Sport podcast has a great synergy with it. And I think it brings in some ideas that I feel are really exciting in terms of finding the meaning in movement, and the value of it, and how it helps us connect with ourselves and connect with each other and the world. And so it's been fun to hear some of those ideas resonate through the podcast, and with Nora as well.
Yeah. If I add here, I think it's I think it's a great series. I think the only downside is that it makes my episodes sound boring. So that's the only problem with the Meaningful Sports series.
I don't think that's true. But I think that's honestly an advantage of getting to collaborate, as you say, and the podcast platform being so open and free, is being able to kind of see where, something doesn't feel as fresh anymore, or an idea you were excited about and that worked a while ago might need to just kind of be reframed. So I think you mentioned, this freedom to constantly be changing or updating, or getting to do what you want with your podcast. And I think that is a really exciting part. I'm wondering if there are other sort of best parts of podcasting that you'd like to share with us.
I don't know if I mentioned already, I think it's really great to be able to talk with clever people. It's so nice to have the discussions, be able to challenge them. They usually have a really long experience, great knowledge. So I think it's just absolutely great to be able to talk with these people. And then I think the nice thing is the fast feedback from the stats, that you actually see how many people have been listening in which countries. So it's very nice that you get immediate feedback. If you compare it to writing a scientific paper, it takes so much time, and and you don't know if anyone is even reading it. And with the podcasting, you get kind of immediate feedback, and I think it's also great from equality point of view, that when you look the podcast app, you see like BBC there, and all these big broadcasters. You see Conan O'Brien, and then you can see your own podcast there. So you have kind of same possibilities as national broadcasters, big stars. So I think it's really, really nice that anyone can do podcast basically. So I think that's a great part of podcasting.
Yes, we totally agree. I feel like there's so much in that answer that resonates with us in terms of being able to talk to amazing people, and then having feedback and being able to reach a really broad audience is very exciting. I'm curious, when you were saying being able to get feedback right away and who's listening, and I was wondering if there's any episode in particular that, or somebody that you've talked to that's been just really exciting for you, and or maybe has gotten some really positive feedback, if there's any, and whether that's like something in particular about an episode, like the guest, or just like a general theme that you've noticed about an episode where it gets really positive feedback.
That's a good question. And when I said feedback, usually you get the feedback from the statistics, that you see how many people listened. And when you actually started podcasting, you didn't get really any feedback from the people like directly. So you didn't really know if they are even real listeners, that if people are listening actually, or it's a bot that is just
Right.
going through your podcast. So I think in the beginning you are in the blind, and you just put out episodes and you're doubting a little bit that it's not very good. Probably no one is listening. These are just fake statistics. And only later on you start to hear something from people. And I think still you don't hear too much feedback. I think people are busy. They don't write too much, but yeah. So I think it has gone quite a bit like that. And you asked about a theme. I'm not sure about that. Usually I like the discussions most, when I can kind of ask tough questions and be creative. And I have had really good recordings, for example, people who are studying the brain, because it's more interesting, because we don't really understand the brain too well. So you can actually ask more difficult questions than many other researchers in different fields.
We're going to go to the flip side and talk about what are some of maybe the challenges of podcasting that you faced in your time doing it.
Yeah. I think basically it's been really good. It's been really encouraging, really positive. I think the biggest downside, it takes some time. So finding the time actually to do the recordings, edit and publish, I think that's the biggest thing. And of course, you probably know it also, that you cannot listen any audio anymore without paying attention to the sound quality. So it's difficult now, you listening, whether these reverb, mouth clicks, whatnot. So it takes away some of the other podcasts, because you pay too much attention to the sound quality. But yeah, I think there's not many downsides. It's really, really just more upsides.
Yeah, I think we totally agree with that, with there just being much more upsides than downsides. And I guess I'm curious too, how you think that this has maybe influenced you as a researcher, being a podcast host and talking to different people, if it's, influenced your personal life and your experiences outside of the podcast.
So I haven't been doing research too much last years. I've been more working on my my company. So I have had some like hobby project in research, which are mainly just nice people, a nice group that we have done some research mainly as hobby, but I haven't been doing research, so probably it hasn't affected me as a researcher. But what would I say? Yeah, I think it's just it gives you a really positive, like you said, that researchers are very willing to help and they are really encouraging. So I have really felt that I have learned that how nice people actually are. So that has been a good learning experience from podcasting, how willing people are to help you.
Yeah, that's a great point. It definitely makes you reflect on how much support you're getting. So that's really great to hear. I'm wondering what you are most excited about for the future of your podcast or podcasting in general, or both.
Yeah, I think trying different formats would be really nice. It's such a free platform that you can be really creative. So I have some ideas for new formats and would like to try. Like you said that you have tried the live episodes. I think that would be a really nice challenge to try going live. And I have done a few episodes of this expert opinion, where you just asking one question from different experts and then compiling them together. So that's one. And yeah, I think the main thing would be trying different formats and see how people like them.
That's awesome. I think my mic. Can you guys hear me okay?
It sounds crazy to me, but Ollie, how does it sound to you?
It sounds crazy to me also.
Yeah, so how do you see the role of podcasting in science communication, more generally?
I think it's much needed. There's so much scientific papers, and if you look some of the statistics, that many of the papers haven't been read like just few times. So I think in science it would be good that we actually discuss and synthesize the knowledge more than actually just produce the papers, which unfortunately is the incentive for many of the researchers at the moment. And it's, even though we have Google, we have artificial intelligence, I think humans are still great condensing knowledge and getting it out. So when you actually have a guest who have done research on some theme for 40 years, it's amazing how much information they have and how much wisdom they can put in it. So I think it's very important in science communications that we give the great researchers kind of opportunity to talk and say their opinion, and maybe challenge them a bit more, because in scientific publications, they really need to have the evidence and they cannot speculate much. But I think it's important also to speculate in different formats. And another thing is that we have evolved listening discussions. So it's a very natural form of getting information. And I think it's really good format for people to listen and learn.
I totally agree. I think your point of being able to communicate the amazing research that people are doing, especially people that have spent, their whole lives doing amazing research and have so much to offer, and so many valuable insights that, are not always shared with the community, because I think sometimes it's hard as researchers. You're doing so much work already in your research and trying to publish, and then it just is this an additional effort to try to then communicate the research to a non-technical audience. And so I think you're right in that podcasting provides this opportunity for someone else to have a conversation with researchers and ask about the research and kind of translate it into a format that is accessible to people. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing for that in your podcast. And if people want to learn more about your podcast and listen or learn more about you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so the name of the podcast is The Physical Activity Researcher, and you should be able to find it basically on all podcast apps from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and so on. So just type the name in your preferred podcast app, and you should be able to find it.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And do you have any final thoughts or comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, I always ask my guest for the final remarks, and when you ask me, I don't know
That's why I
what
was
to
surprised.
say. I have never been.
When we had our interview right before this, and you asked us, and I was like, I don't know. I didn't think that far ahead. So now we're putting you on the spot in the same way.
Yeah, no, it has been a pleasure to talk with you, Melissa and Hannah. It's always nice to kind of share insights from podcasting. So it was really nice to have this discussion and opportunity with you. So I think that's it. And for your podcast, keep doing the good work. It's great that you have the podcast.
Yeah, well, we can definitely say the same for you. Thank you for all that you do, and thanks for sharing your insights with us. And we're excited to keep listening to the Physical Activity Researcher podcast.
Thanks for joining us this week on Physical Activity Researcher podcast. If you like the show, make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing or following the show on Twitter. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. If you found value in the show, we would really appreciate a rating on Apple Podcasts or whichever app you're using. Or if you would, in a real old school way, simply tell a friend about the show. It would be a great help for us. We have a fantastic lineup of guests for forthcoming episodes, so be sure to tune in. Thank you all for your support and have a great day.